Hey, I'm Timothy Ratajczak. Welcome to another episode of Chatting with The Chosen. On behalf of The Chosen and Against the Tide Media, I want to welcome you to an interview with the very busy actor Stelio Savante, who appears in episode 7 of The Chosen as the prophet Moses. He will also be familiar to some of you as the prisoner Demas in Dallas Jenkins' short film, The Two Thieves, or Once We Were Slaves, depending on the streaming platform. He also recently appeared with actor Jim Caviezel in the feature film Infidel, which we will talk about a little later. Stelio, welcome.
Thank you. I've seen some of your interviews. I'm very happy to be on the show. Thank you.
Well, no one else has brought any charges, so I trust that, we can. So let's start at the beginning, Stelio. You were born in South Africa during a very difficult time in that nation's history, but you identify as an American, having spent most of your adult life in New York. Can you tell us about your journey from Afrikaner to New Yorker? And of course, we would love to hear about all the stops along the way, including your educational background and your religious upbringing, if you don't mind talking about them.
Sure. I do want to just correct. I was never an Afrikaner. So my father and his family moved from Europe to South Africa in the 60s. My mother, although born there, her parents were of British and Lithuanian descent. And my parents did not have it easy moving to South Africa during and prior to apartheid. It wasn't just a black versus white issue. It was much more sort of considered than that, because everybody and anybody that wasn't a local was a threat. I grew up at a time in South Africa where military conscription was mandatory. You had to serve 2 years, and if you didn't serve 2 years, you would be imprisoned. After many conversations over the years with my grandmother, with all of our family, hearing their stories of how they'd come over as immigrants and how difficult the South African government and locals had made life for them, it did not feel like a path that I wanted to pursue. It's not there was rancor or bitterness. It's just that we were very much against what was happening. And a tennis scholarship was my way out of the country. I received that scholarship to the University of West Alabama. I also ended up playing football for them, received a partial scholarship there. So I was a two-way athlete. Great school. It's got a lot of players in the NFL, a lot of all pros in the NFL on the football side of things. And they had a fascinating theater department run by the great James McGahee. The bug bit, and I loved it. I was consumed with it. I wanted to learn and study and fail and learn why I failed and how I fail again, but fail differently. Every year I'd go home for Christmas, and I met the girl who is now my wife of almost 29 years in Cape Town. And she lived in New York, which is where I was going to move to anyway. James McGahee, who headed up our theater department at West Alabama, said, "We've never really had anybody like you come through here with, what you're able to bring as to the table as an actor because of your crazy experiences in your life. But in addition to that, how much you want to pursue it as a living." And I have a few people I can recommend in New York. So it was a natural course for me to take off. So I left after about close to 2 years at school in the South, and lived in New York for over 2 decades before moving out to LA for a series.
I've already been warned not to play you in tennis because you have a a 5.0, I understand, and you have to be what, six in order to play professionally. So
No, I never ever played professionally. Was nowhere near good enough for that. I mean, I played it in the USTA leagues. You'd probably beat me now. I'm actually just 6 months out of a full knee replacement surgery.
right.
I'm not to the point where I can run yet. I will be probably in the next few weeks. But yeah, tennis was a very large part of my life for sure.
Well, you didn't really touch on your religious background.
Sure.
Is there anything relevant about that you think the fans would be interested in hearing about?
Yes, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I forgot that part of the question. So I grew up in a Greek Orthodox family. My mother had converted in order to be able to marry my father because she was brought up Jewish. She converted to Orthodoxism. I had a difficult childhood for several different reasons. When my parents were divorced, I fell in love with the story of acceptance of Jesus Christ. Made a decision for the Lord in 1984, not really understanding even what that meant, but knowing I was drawn to it, and in my heart, I accepted him as my savior. And I've been walking since then. Obviously, a lot of times the Lord lets you make mistakes out in the desert, and you come back to him. So with my parents' divorce, my mother gave her life to the Lord. Then my father lost his business. He gave his life to the Lord. My grandmother, his mother, she got baptized in an evangelical church in her 70s, which, if you know Greek Orthodox believers, that just doesn't happen. They're stubborn, more stubborn than mules. They're hard to convince, and it's not about convincing them. It's a willing acceptance of the heart. So, my sister is a Christian, and that continued when I moved to the States. So I'd been baptized first as a Greek Orthodox baby. I was then baptized again in Alabama at a Baptist church in 1990 or 1991. And then I again recommitted my life to the Lord, not because I'd gone anywhere. I just felt that I wanted to about 2 years ago in Los Angeles. So that's been my walk as a follower of Jesus.
Well, it's a story that sounds very familiar to me. If it doesn't sound familiar to anyone else, you'd have to know me a little bit better in order to get the references. So you, as an actor, have over 100 IMDb entries, and I'm sure there's some that got missed. This may be apropos of nothing, but I noticed that the characters you play on screen get killed a lot. I think about 8 times, and twice I think your characters were buried alive. Does your agent send you a script, and then when you read it, do you read it to see if you're still alive at the end?
That's very funny. And that figure doesn't sound right. It's probably close to at least 2 to 3 dozen times I've probably died. Not that anybody's counting, but when you start to see you've already died in the way, and the next thing you're going out for, you ask if you could die differently. No, it doesn't. It doesn't quite work that way. They send you a script either with an offer or in other cases an audition, and you see if there's something you can connect with, or if there's something you're terrified of, or if there's something that interests you. All reasons why you would want to take something. And if that happens, then so be it. Because I play a lot of those characters, and I happen to play a lot of villains over the years, Christian audiences, and even people in some of the churches I've been in have been very harsh. They ask me how I justify playing characters that curse, characters that kill people, characters that do things that they would definitely be in prison or killed for. And I struggled with that at first. I felt it was a very judgmental question because we put God in a box. And if you read the Bible, it's the most R-rated book ever written. There are more villains and more gratuitous violence in there than anything I've ever seen on screen, that's for sure. The great thing about playing evil characters or people who are on the wrong side of the law is that there is a chance for redemption and there is a chance for an arc. But if there isn't, I had sat down and had the conversation with Pastor Mike Finizio at Harvest, New York, and he said, Stelio, first of all, that's between you and the Lord. Secondly, is their sin glorified, or is there a consequence for it? Because if you look at the Bible in any way, shape, or form, it doesn't matter who the character is or the person is. God does not call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And Peter committed the greatest sin ever. He rejected Christ 3 times. The Lord came out of the tomb and he told the women, tell the others and tell Peter, because he didn't want him to feel bad. And it doesn't matter whether you look at Gideon or Moses or Paul or Samson. The Lord used very flawed men. They all struggled, and there were both consequences for their sins, but there was also kingdom-driven work that was rewarded by God. And to just kind of combine what you'd asked with what I'm saying, there are other characters, other than characters that get killed. I mean, there's obviously a lot of work that I've done in film, TV, and theater, but I guess if casting directors, and producers know you for something and feel you do something well, I don't ever want to show the same behavior twice in a role. I don't want to show the same thing twice in a scene, because I feel that there's no person that's all good or all evil. People are flawed. So I want to show a relatable, real person that is a believable character. And sometimes those happen to be people that have consequences for their actions. And if that comes in the form of death, and it feels like a natural embracing of the writing and the narrative, as long as I understand the inner thought process of the character, I'm fine with it.
I was going to bring that question a little later in the interview, but you've already handled it perfectly. So thank you. Let's talk specifically about your appearance in The Chosen. In the episode Invitations, you play Moses, which may seem a bit odd for a show about Jesus, but the script does square the circle rather neatly. The cold opening of the show, which is the part we're in, refers specifically to the 21st chapter of the book of Numbers, wherein God punishes the people of Israel for their disobedience with venomous snake bites. And of course, Moses is instructed to make a snake, put it on a pole, and anyone who is bitten can look at it and live. Christians naturally see this as a direct reference to the crucified Jesus. But at the time, the people of Israel saw this symbol as a bit bizarre.
The people would say it is a cruel joke. Let them say that. Joshua, any Israelite who looks upon this bronze serpent and believes in the power of Adonai will be healed. It's an act of faith, not reason. Faith.
What exactly appealed to you about playing Moses, especially after Charlton Heston and Christian Bale had a crack at it?
There's I'll try to remember everything you addressed in the question, and if I don't, please lead me back in. So I'd worked with Dallas twice before. I'd worked with Dallas on a film called What If, which I thought was well done. It came out in, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something to that effect. So I was already familiar with him. I was friends with him. We had done the Two Thieves or Once We Were Slaves. The film does have 2 titles. And I knew that Dallas had a tremendous gift at being able to navigate narrative from the perspective that's not usually told, i.e., people as they saw Jesus, not from Jesus' perspective, but from theirs. He did that with the Two Thieves as well. And I already was familiar not only with the way he wrote, but with the way, or the way he and Tyler wrote, but with the way he worked as a director. I've worked with just many, many, many directors, and Dallas he's a very actor-friendly director to work with. He's an actor's director through and through. So the way it came to be was the year prior, he had actually reached out to me for a completely different role on The Chosen. I was meant to go to Texas and shoot it, but they had issues with really bad rainfall, which damaged a lot of the Capernaum village that they were shooting in. Not permanently damaged it, but they had to wait for that so they could shoot. They had to wait for it to dry up. As that got delayed, I had other offers on the table. One of those was for a film called Infidel that I would go on to shoot in the Middle East. I was there for 7 weeks. I was in Jordan and then extended to go to see Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Anyway, I was devastated because not only was I very much wanting to be a part of that series and did I believe in it and did I want to work with Dallas, but I won't go into detail on what the role was, but the role was, I could personalize it easily. I connected with it. A couple of months went by and I touched base with him. I said, I'm back in town. He goes, okay. He goes, I got something for you. I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's very special. It's something we want to bring you in for because it's an iconic role and we feel you can pull it off and you have to say yes. So no pressure. So I read it and I don't necessarily think in terms of who's played the role before. I don't approach things that way. I need to see, how the character helps drive a story forward, what a character's needs and intentions are, and how he relates to driving that story forward with the leads in the show. So, this was a different take on Moses, one I had not seen before, because whenever Moses is portrayed, it's usually leading the people into the Holy Land, out of the Egyptians' occupation, or it's the bringing down of the tablets or the 10 Commandments, which I guess could be compared to the Sermon on the Mount, if you were to take the Old Testament version of it. This, however, was obviously a young, middle-aged Moses. To me, subtext is way stronger than actual dialogue. To me, both from a personal and a creative perspective, and also as a film fan, I'm much more interested with the moments when characters aren't speaking, how they live, how they breathe, what their behavior is, what their eyes tell us about what they're dealing with. Moses very strongly in that cold opening talks about faith and not understanding. And the people at that time had a terrible habit of doubting. What would later happen, we obviously know, is they were led out of occupation to freedom, and then they wanted to go right back. Manna wasn't good enough for them. And knowing that would happen in the future and being able to come back, it was easy to see why Moses could be seen as a shepherd or a teacher very early on, or in the middle of his life, if you will, and how people would miss the point that it wasn't about a pagan symbol. It wasn't about a snake. It wasn't about gold. It was about believing that when God tells you to do something, you do it. And to me, it reminded me of something that bothered me as a child. I could not understand what kind of God would lead Abraham to the top of a mountain to kill his son. I thought it was disgusting, but I was blind. I didn't have spiritual perspective. As you learn history and you become a believer and you study, you see that people back then thought they would be closer to God if they sacrificed their children. And the reason he took him up there was to show him, you don't need to kill your son. You don't need to sacrifice him. I want your heart. I want a relationship with you. Likewise with that, Moses was trying to share something very similar with his people at a time when they were dying at an alarming pace. And one always looks at something and goes and wonders, okay, does this character come back? How does one start the scene? How does one end the scene? And you have a process you fall back on. So I said yes, I accepted it and had a blast filming it. I already knew the cinematographer. I had done a film called Running for Grace in Hawaii with Jim Caviezel and Matt Dillon, and I had been one of the main people that recommended the cinematographer for the series to Dallas. So I knew I'd be working with a great team, and I already loved everything about the series. I loved everything about what I'd seen because they didn't shoot all 8 back to back. They only at the beginning aired 4 and it was staggered. So one had a chance to see not only the quality of the product, but the kind of people that were getting involved with it.
God frequently tells people to do things that they don't want to do. particularly Moses and Abraham. And I find it ironic that we're having this conversation now during what's known as Holy Week, but it just coincidentally happens to be the time of the Passover. So from one to another, good Pesach. And why is this night different from all other nights? Because your mother is doing the cooking is the answer. You've already mentioned that you worked with Dallas before, and the story of the two thieves, in a broad sense, is biblical because the Bible does tell us about the two thieves that were crucified with Jesus. But the dramatization of it is not biblical.
Right.
The Bible doesn't tell us what happened and the backstory on the thieves. And this one sort of does. And I'm not going to, if you haven't seen the short film in either of its iterations, it's the same movie. It just has two different titles. I'm not going to give away the ending as to who ends up being the good thief and the bad thief. But it is interesting to see all that brought out. And sometimes that can be a hot potato when filmmakers try to fill in the blanks. I point to The Last Temptation of Christ as a minefield there, because there you had a filmmaker who was trying to talk about or dramatize something that could have happened but didn't actually happen. And here you are playing one of the thieves who was ultimately going to be crucified with Jesus. And yet you had to make him real. He had to have a backstory, and the Bible doesn't tell us anything. So besides reading the script, how on earth did you as an actor prepare for such an undertaking, and what was the criticism you were expecting to get?
I don't go into a role expecting to get criticism or praise. I go into a role wanting to inhabit and honor the words of the writer, wanting to honor that character, wanting to honor the director. I mean, every actor has their own process, and I won't bore you with mine, but I do create my own backstory. I'll work with the other actor. I will always request a director conversation. And it was important for me that, again, living in the subtext, the moments that breathe, the moments that are unspoken, we understood very clearly what, I've got to make sure not to mention who the character is for the people who haven't seen it, what that character's intentions, needs, and wants were. And I feel that I am that man. I feel that I had many things that I regretted in my life, many things I could pull from personally, where I'd already walked in his shoes and didn't necessarily feel worthy, didn't necessarily feel like I deserved, salvation, if you will.
Please. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. Truly, I say to you, today, you will be with me in paradise. Paradise? Do you know what he has done? He is a vile man. Do you know who you are talking to? Don't you know who you are talking to? Yes. Yes.
And Jonathan has even spoken about that when playing the role of Jesus, because it's a great calling and a great honor, but my gosh, are we worthy to fill these shoes? So the preparation for it required a tremendous amount of research, where you want to have an understanding both physically and psychologically what happens to the body during crucifixion. You also want to be able to put yourself in the shoes of characters that lived a long time ago, what the struggles in life were, the kind of people they surrounded themselves with, and how they were perceived by others and what their opinions of others were. And again, it's hard to answer you directly without giving away who I play in it. But I will say that at that point, all my focus was on Jesus Christ, the character played by Jonathan. It was a very natural progression, a very easy thing for me to do because, again, I've lived life, I've made errors, I've done things I've regretted, but I feel that if you are a believer, you know the weight that comes with the territory. If you have a relationship with Jesus Christ, you understand that at some point the old man dies and the new takes over. So it's hard to speak any more figuratively or literally than that, because it would be a vexation to anybody seeing the film because they'd know what would happen. So
good. That's very well handled. And please, folks, if you subscribe to one of the platforms, PureFlix, Amazon, or whatever, it's about a half an hour film, and it is well worth your time. I want to switch gears for a moment. I want to talk about your appearance in a play by Sarah Tuft called 110 Stories, which is a moment-by-moment account of the 9/11 attacks on New York City on 9/11, as told by eyewitnesses. A version of that play appeared on A&E, and you can catch clips of it if you look it up on Vimeo and YouTube. You were actually in New York on that fateful day in 2001. Can you tell us about your thoughts and your feelings and how they inspired your performance in this extraordinary play?
Yes. New York had been home for a long, long time. And I guess it was one of those rare things you experience in life that you hope most people never get to, because the brain betrays what the eye is seeing. It doesn't register. And to see that much fear, that much death, that much life had just been turned on its head. And Sarah brilliantly, as a dramaturg, took these interviews, and they were from people that most of us wouldn't consider to be heroes. Homeless people that lived under the World Trade Center, photographers, canine walkers, preachers. It wasn't just about firemen and policemen. And of course, they do play very relevant characters in it. In fact, the lead in it is a fireman who lost most of his, they don't call it most of his firehouse. The character I play, Bolivar Arellano, is a photographer who took pictures of some of the most graphic events that day, including some of the jumpers from the building. And I wanted to spend time with him to get to know his heart, to get to know what provoked him to be brave enough to run and continue to take photos while the event was happening. And then he opened up about certain things that couldn't even be told. Some of the pictures were so graphic they couldn't be shown on TV. A year after 9/11, he has his gallery up, and there's this woman who's outside looking in, can't go inside, doesn't have the strength to do it. So he opens the door and goes and speaks to her and invites her in. She goes up to a certain picture, starts crying hysterically. So he closes the gallery, says, "I'm so sorry. I'm an artist. I didn't mean to bring pain. I was just doing what I'm born to do." And she thanked him because she didn't know how her husband had passed. It was, in fact, a photo of one of the suicide jumpers jumping out of the building. And he's got all of the characters in this have incredible stories. As a New Yorker, you're not only greatly affected by what has happened, but you realize more than ever, innocence and trust and safety is the notion of that is gone. It puts into perspective how easily you could be here today and gone in the next second or tomorrow. It was also tough to live with for months after, because the smell of jet fuel propelled its way all the way into the boroughs. And you hear the stories of heroism that did happen. I mean, there were canines that walked in there rescuing body parts. They never came back out. There were backpackers who reached out to help someone else and then got completely flattened by concrete and glass. I fell in love with the play. It's important to me that people don't forget what happened that day. It's one of those things that I think significantly changed the way we saw life. So I took the responsibility, with Sarah's kindness, of bringing the play out to New York and producing it. I had been the lead producer on it for a long, long time. We had always done it for charity. The casts have been amazing. We've had, household names like Sam Jackson and Susan Sarandon and tons of them like that do it both here and in New York. Always doing it for nonprofits to raise money for charity and awareness. Sometimes it would be for organizations like the New York Says Thank You Foundation, to something as simple as Operation Gratitude. So that character in that monologue is a go-to for me. It has been for years. When I'm on set in a role and I need to get to a certain place for that character, that monologue is something I go back to. When I'm prepping a show, that role is something I go back to. It centers me. It's my go-to piece. And I'm very grateful to her for that, and to the men and women we're portraying. I have a very close relationship with Bolivar. Incredible photographer who leading up to 9/11 and taking those photos had almost been killed by guerrillas all over South America for capturing incredible events of some very notorious people. So, I don't know. We're talking about maybe possibly considering doing something with it this year. It's the 20-year anniversary, but between COVID and everything else, I don't know. We'll have to see. I have a couple of producing partners I've discussed with it. We'll see what happens.
Now, Tuft manages to definitely avoid politics in the play. But since you were actually there and you're in the play itself, were you at the time aware of a spiritual element of 9/11, the good versus the evil? Or did that never factor into your thinking, or did it take a while?
No, it was evident almost immediately, because people were open. They asked for prayer. It's a terrible thing to say, but I feel like it united us. Even if it was just for a day, people weren't focused on themselves anymore. They were not. They were focusing on helping, praying for survivors, volunteering, being able to do things selflessly and putting others first. So that element, without a doubt, was there. I pray that we learn from it, not just as a country, but globally. And it's just a tough thing to negotiate in conversation, because ultimately it does become political. People immediately make it about, why did we go to war? And then the other side will be like, we didn't go to war soon enough. So why can't it just be about recognizing the people that passed on the day, and all of the actual heroes who did make sacrifices, all of the heroes who did tell their stories, and remember what brought us together? Because if we could use that every day and learn from that lesson every single day, I just think we'd be much better people. We'd be a much better world, obviously.
Whenever I do these interviews, I like to be esoteric at times, even at the risk of losing the audience. But you had a role in the movie about the Russian filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein.
Yes.
That was written and directed by Peter Greenaway, whose films have been a staple of art houses for nearly 50 years. And his films are unusual, to perhaps understate things. It's like to work with such a creative but very strange man.
He is a strange man. He's a wonderfully strange man. To know Peter is to love him. He's out of his mind in a good way. And I told him that, and I'm very grateful both to
I don't know if you know this, but Peter Greenaway was famously quoted I forget what set of the movie he was on, but someone pointed out to him that there was a continuity error from the one scene to the next shot, and Greenaway's response was, "Continuity is boring."
That is him. That is Peter to a T. That basically defines who he is, and I'm very grateful to producer Karin de Boer, who I'd worked on Where the Road Runs Out with, and South African director Rudolf Beitendach. They both recommended me for the project. I had a conversation with Peter. It was a direct offer. We shot in Mexico. We then went to complete the film. We had a little work we had to do on the back end in Brussels. Peter is of that era, the Jean-Luc Godard era, and his films are visual masterpieces. They're not necessarily the most conventional, and in some cases the most linear films. But to me, one of the greatest performances of the late Brian Dennehy's career was in a movie called The Belly of an Architect. Brilliantly shot, fascinating, about a man's struggle with certain things in his life. The Draftsman's Contract I found highly entertaining. Most people will know him for The Wife, the Cook, His Thief, and the Wife. Is it The Wife, the Cook, His Thief, and Her Lover? I believe it is.
It's The Cook, the Thief, the Wife, and his lover, and
Okay.
there may have even been a rabbi involved in that at some point. But you're right; that was perhaps the most, and I hesitate to use this word, mainstream of his
100%.
of
Yes.
his films.
It was, and you had, I mean, Helen Mirren was phenomenal in
Yes.
it. Phenomenal in it. Peter will take 10 to 12 hours to light a set, to pre-light. Rainer von Brummelen, I've been blessed in my career to work with some of the very best DPs, from Roger Deakins to Trevor Brown to Dom Burgess, and I mean, just tons of them. And Rainer is right up there. He is unbelievable. They understand how you build tension and conflict on set through behavior and movement, not through dialogue. And I love that about them. However, Peter wanted my specific character played as a caricature. And I struggled with that because you don't want to feel that you're forcing something. So his world with actors, I preface it this way. I already loved who Sergei Eisenstein was because I'd seen one of the 17 different versions of Battleship Potemkin that is out there. And I feel that our industry owes a lot to him. He's one of the greatest directors that ever lived. He invented montage. Without him, we didn't have such a thing. But there was a moment where Peter and I were sitting down to lunch, and he was talking about something he wanted to do about Christ. And he went, "Oh, you don't believe that crap, do you?" And I said, "Peter, where do you think your gifts come from?" And there was silence for about 30 seconds. And then he leaned into me and he went, "Are you a Christian?" And I said, "Yes, Peter, I am." And he goes, "Ah, I see." Changed the subject, never brought it out again. Never brought it up again. And I remember the first night we all went out to dinner, producers and lead cast, because he spent half the dinner trying to bargain for a beautiful painting that was on the wall, offering ridiculous amounts of money for it, forgotten that he hadn't even ordered on his menu. And that I understand a little Spanish, and I heard the waiter speaking, and they, "Oh, that's Peter Greenaway. Yeah. And we were filming, in the town where Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, who are characters in the film, where their house was. You can go and visit it. And Guanajuato is just an amazing city, a place everybody should visit. One of my favorite places I've ever worked. And Peter knew how much the town, the city itself, was a character in the film, and he drew that out beautifully. He is eccentric. He is strange. He's got a beautiful brain that works very uniquely. I think people can watch the film and make their own decisions, but I'm glad that I had an opportunity to work with him.
I think he was being a little disingenuous there about the whole Christianity thing, simply because he did obviously grow up with a religious background. And if you've seen a lot of his movies, the visuals draw from a great deal of religious imagery, paintings and icons and so on and so forth. So his statement to you may have revealed more about himself than he meant for it to reveal. I also might want to point out that Queen Elizabeth knighted him, I think in 2007. and the poor thing may not have had any idea who she was knighting. But anyway, good on.
Look, if I may just add, if I may say this, he has said many times that most of his films are about sex and death. And I feel that he grew up in an era where religion was perceived a certain way. And he has this subversive, rebellious, aggressive opinion of it. So you're correct. I think he was speaking more about himself. But what was important to me was that I was able to ask him. I hope it caused him or behooved him psychologically to think about and wonder about where do his gifts as a filmmaker come from, because he's extremely talented. His films look brilliant. Again, they're not everybody's taste, but I'm glad I had an opportunity to ask him that question.
I remember going to see Prospero's books in the theater years ago, and I was literally the only person in the audience.
Sure.
So he is way far out of the mainstream. So yeah. Good on you for getting the opportunity to work with such a strange but creative man. Let's walk into a minefield of our own here. You are probably famously known for your appearance in the movie Infidel. It came out in 2020 with the great Jim Caviezel. It was produced by Dinesh D'Souza, who is well known to Christians and to conservatives. And the movie is supposed to have been based on a true story. For those who haven't seen it, it's a rather dangerous mix of religion and politics. And without going into the politics, can you talk about your decision to take a rather substantial role in this movie?
Yes, I can. And I would also like to preface my answer by saying none of us actually had any idea Dinesh D'Souza was involved with the film till literally the day before it came out. I've had other interviews about this, and we just didn't know, and that's just how it is. Yeah. So the film's been out. It was very successful. It's been very successful on streaming. So people probably know I played a South African journalist who's actually a Mossad agent, and my closest friend Gavin, who I've been friends with since we've been probably 10 or 11 years old. His mother went to high school and was friends with Sylvia Raphael, who is probably Mossad's most notorious South African agent. She wasn't even Jewish, she was Christian. And there's a tremendous amount of research one can do on her to pull from that. And I read the script, and it was one of the most brave and courageous scripts I'd ever seen. It didn't apologize. It was an action thriller. This was not, as Jim Caviezel himself said, a candy-ass Christian film. I think Christians have done a horrible job for the most part in cinema. I don't think they understand cinema well for the most part. I think they need to do a better job of pursuing artistic integrity, really learning how to write, understanding camera, and casting talent that knows what they're doing. The director of this film defines getting great performances and writing really well. Cyrus Naraste is one of the most gifted people in this industry. And I'm not his publicist, but this is all leading up to your answer. His film, The Stoning of Soraya M, was based on a true story coming out of Iran of a woman who was stoned to death, falsely accused of infidelity. That film would go on to win a Cinema for Peace Justice Award at Berlinale. It would go on to win audience award at runner-up audience award at Toronto. He then did a film called The Young Messiah, based on Anne Rice's book. He's a brilliant filmmaker, and he understands the pulse of the characters he's writing. He's written for and collaborated with Oliver Stone, Steven Spielberg, Chris Columbus. So when he came to it with me and said, I have a role for you, I understood the responsibility that would come with that and wanted to make sure that I could bring something personal to the character that I felt would be interesting enough to live up to what the rest of the characters did. Because if I'm playing a character that doesn't really help drive a story forward, then there's no need for me to be there. I gave him my notes and my feedback. I was thrilled to work with him. We were actually looking to work on an earlier project of his 2 years ago that didn't come to pass. I absolutely adored the character's story because he wasn't your conventional hero or savior. He's the one that ultimately, obviously, helps Jim escape. I'm not saying anything people haven't seen.
Right.
But it was how we got there that I thought was fascinating. And when you add to that where we filmed it, over the years, I've been blessed to live and shoot in 4 different continents. And I'd never been to Asia. I'd never been to Western Asia. I'd never been to the Middle East or the Holy Land. It was a 5-week shoot in Jordan. My daughter and my wife were able to come visit for the end of it. We then went into the Holy Land, spent Christmas Eve at the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem for midnight mass. Obviously, I'd already worked with Jim very extensively for 5-6 weeks in Hawaii on Running for Grace. I'd worked with him on Person of Interest for about a week, maybe 10 days. Usually you take films for a number of reasons. One is, you love the role. 2 is the money is good. 3 is you love the director and the team of people involved. You love where it's shooting. This was all of the above. It literally checked every box. And although I had other offers on the table, including a different role on The Chosen, I had prayed about it and I knew this is where I was meant to be going. I fell in love with the people of Jordan, with its culture, with the Palestinians that worked with us, just beautiful people, Muslims and Christians alike, just wonderful, wonderful people. And I have made many friends and maintained great relationships. And I'm very grateful to Cyrus that he saw me as part of his vision for the film. I'm proud of it, very proud of the film. And I thank Dinesh D'Souza and Debbie D'Souza for, again, I don't know the exact nature of their role in the film, but their EPs, usually that means they had some part in the financing or the P&A. I don't know, and it's not my business. And I didn't know, as did none of the rest of us till the day before they were involved, but I'm grateful to them for believing in and pushing the project. I think it's an absolutely brilliant film.
It's a hot potato, for sure. Now, you mentioned, of course, that it was filmed in Jordan, which is part of the cradle of Christianity, so to speak.
Amen. Oh, yeah.
I read stories, and maybe you would be in a better position to know this than I would. I read stories that there were, well, I won't call them spies, representatives from the Iranian government that were on the set. Did you, this may seem like a corny question, but did you ever feel like you were in any danger?
That's a brilliant question. And I there's some stuff I can't talk about, and I'll share what I can talk about. The King of Jordan supports Christians. The King of Jordan protects Christians. Jim and I went to church together. We visited a Catholic church and attended service. I then went to Jordan House of Prayer. The Christian movement is very strong in the Middle East. But while we were there, Roma Downey and Mark Burnett had a series that was shooting there called Messiah, a Netflix series. Their production did something that was extremely offensive, that was not well viewed by locals. Papers got hold of it immediately. It had something to do with them using Mossad cars and license plates on the streets. And I don't know if Mark and Roma even knew anything about it. This was just the crew on the ground. So I'm not going to slander or mischaracterize what might have happened. All I know is that when that happened, a lot of times after long days on the shoot, because it's a fairly dusty city in Amman, it's an amazing city, but you want to relax and kind of prep for the next day. So Jim and I would be in the sauna, and this one guy kept coming in asking really strange questions, and we believe he was a spy. He was trying to get us to badmouth the king, which we wouldn't do. And finally, Jim just said, after several nights of this, he goes, "What is it you guys want to find out? What is it you're trying to learn?" And the man said, "You guys have offended a lot of people by using these license plates in these cars." And Jim said, "But that's not our production." He goes, "Yes, it is yours. You're a Messiah." And Jim said, No, I'm Jim Caviezel. I'm doing a film called Infidel. I played the Messiah in The Passion, but you're talking about a series called Messiah. That's not our production. That's our production produced by Mark and Roma. And they might have had no clue what's going on here. But is this why you're asking us all these questions and following us all the time? After that day, security was beefed up. we had to be pretty well protected going into and coming out of set. And there were other things which happened that I can't talk about, but I will tell you that the King of Jordan and his Royal Jordanian Film Commission, which is his family, are amazing hosts. They took great care of us. They did everything they could to support the film. There is a scene in there with a helicopter. We had the Royal Jordanian Air Force fly that for us. We had their approval. We had their help with everything. And I can't wait to go back to Jordan. I miss it. I did visit Petra, biblical city, which you referenced earlier in terms of, Christianity and the cradle of civilization, although I think Armenia and Iran might argue that they have equal part in that. But yeah, Wadi Rum is amazing. We stayed at the Bubble Hotel. So we stayed where they shot the film The Martian. We saw where they shot Star Wars and Dune. We actually went to the rock where there's a very famous rock in Lawrence of Arabia where they actually indented a sculpture into the rock. We visited that as well. The desert is run by Bedouins, and it was a fascinating experience.
Well, we could go on for hours about this, but that is pretty scary stuff as far as I'm concerned. And I don't necessarily think that that's what any actor signs on to when they agree to be in a movie. So That was a great adventure for you, I'm sure.
It was. And you put that very succinctly, because other people were fearful. Like, do you really want to go shoot there? What are you thinking? Are you out of your mind? I don't see things that way. I'm an immigrant. I come from what was essentially a third world country as a child. I lived in Greece as a child. I filmed in South America. So I've been and lived and worked many places, including Europe. So I don't have that fear. And it was a great eye opener for me, because people who are on opposite poles of the political spectrum immediately assume that Palestinians are villains. They're not. They're amazing people, and they have great hearts. And yes, they believe in Islam, which actually does recognize Jesus Christ as a prophet, not the Son of God. We had amazing conversations about the Lord. And, I found more often than not, the truth very much was in the middle of that conflict. Obviously, we know that Israel and the Jews are God's chosen people. That's what our Bible tells us. So if anybody disagrees with that, their issue is not with us, it's with God's word, and they can take it up with God. But I will say that I was just incredibly impressed with the hospitality and love from all parties involved. I will even share that some of our background people on Infidel themselves were Syrians and Iraqis that had been persecuted, and Yazidis who had actually fled their specific nations. And to be able to, through a translator, let a person know you're praying for them or caring for them, or that you're sorry about everything they've had to endure, it's pretty impactful, keeping in mind that I think somewhere between 30 and 40% of Jordan is actually made up of refugees. If I may also add real quick, with it being Holy Week, Once We Were Slaves, or the Two Thieves, is available to see without charge on, I got Dallas's blessings on it, on both my Instagram page and my verified public page. So thank you, Dallas, for that. It is a very strong story leading up to the resurrection and, of course, Good Friday. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about that.
You've satisfied my curiosity in some respects about some of the work that you've done, but you've also raised hundreds of other questions that I would love to ask you at another time. So
let's do it. I thank you for your very well thought out. You have asked questions that very few people ask. You don't ask the obvious questions, and that makes it interesting and conversational to me. It's no longer an interview. So thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Well, I am a bit of a cinephile myself. I've dabbled in writing. I've had some films produced. So I understand exactly where you're coming from. And I can only share with you a quick story about the life of a writer in the movies. When the Marx Brothers were making maybe Duck Soup, one of the screenwriters, George S. Kaufman, was on the set, and he was sitting in a chair, and during one of the takes, he got up just slightly. And then he quickly sat back down. And then after the take was over, somebody turned to him and said, Mr. Kaufman, is everything all right? And he said, yes. It's just that for a second there, I actually thought I heard something I wrote. And so, as you know, the acting craft is such that some actors like to take the lines and make them their own. Obviously, if you cast somebody like, the late, great Robin Williams, if he wants to go off on a tangent, you let him go. But I can only imagine that the other actors who worked with him probably didn't like that a whole lot because they like to stay on script. But
it's different. You bring up a great point. A lot of it depends on how the director works. It depends on whether the director is also the writer. And improv is also greatly understood. Everybody thinks it's always affiliated with comedy. It's not. Some of the best moments in dramatic film history, the whole Robert De Niro, Are You Talking to Me moment in The Mirror, in Taxi Driver, not scripted, completely improvised. In my conversations with Russell Crowe when I worked with him, a lot of the moments in Gladiator, not scripted, improvised. So I do feel at the end of the day, we have to remember and recognize and honor the writer, because without him, there's absolutely nothing. But I do think we also need to honor and honor and really buy into the director's vision of a project. Otherwise, there's no point in signing on. And sometimes that vision comes to life when you do make it yours. Otherwise, why are they hiring you? So it's a very fine line. I think in terms of the work I've done, I'd say I find it's about 50-50. A lot of directors are very adamant that you stick to what is scripted. They feel it's the most pure and organic it'll be, whereas other directors want it to come alive.
And, speaking as a writer, I can happily say that when one of those improvised moments shows up on the screen, someone comes up to you and says, that was a great idea you had there. It's just best to say, oh, thank you so much. Of course, the public has no idea the genesis of the thing. And you talking to me, I think that Paul Schrader would be happy to take credit for having written that, even though it was De Niro's invention. But hey, we could talk shop all day, but I know you're busy.
Sure.
But can you just give us some idea of what's up next for you?
Sure. You would, and I'll come back and talk about this down the road because I think it's something you'd appreciate. Right now, we're shooting just an incredible film based on the true story. It's called Pull from Darkness. I'm in Indiana, of these children and their mother who were they were trafficked, human trafficking in Armenia. These Armenian missionaries set out to rescue them. I can't say much more than that. I will tell you that George Johnson is an absolutely brilliant filmmaker. And it's a story I'm honored to be part of. I just wrapped on a Netflix series, a film in Louisiana, a film in Georgia. The next things you can see me in coming up. I'm in a sci-fi film directed by Andy Stapp with Tony Todd. It's called Destination Marfa. I think a clip was just released from it all over the trades last week. I'm also in a comedy with Frank Langella and Bobby Cannavale based on a best-selling novel called Lapham Rising. And for video game fans, I play Ajax I voice him in all of the Call of Duties. In fact, I think Black Ops 4 Mobile is having its second expansion pack coming out soon. So, yeah.
Very groovy stuff. So I guess to wrap up here, now that you have the full attention of all the fans of The Chosen and Against the Tide Media, is there anything you'd like to say to them in particular?
I would love to thank them for their support and for their passion for all of these projects. Without an audience, we don't have a film, we don't have a show. And I would like to share something from scripture, which my friend James Alexander shared with me recently, a brother that I love very dearly. And it deals with the book of Matthew and the story of Peter when he falls in the water, which we've all heard many times. He falls, he says, save me, and the Lord does save him. And in the book of Matthew, the very next verse after the Lord saves him says, when they were back in the boat, the Lord calmed the storm. And this specific sermon that James shared with me said that if that is the next verse, then obviously Jesus walked Peter on the water back to the boat. walked Peter back to the boat in that storm. He did not take the storm away. Peter's faith grew. The faith of the disciples grew. And it really paralleled the believer's walk. It's a marathon where Jesus does not take our storms away, but he literally physically walks through them with us. And I thought that was the most profound thing that I heard on that specific teaching of Scripture. I'd never heard that point of view before. I never connected the dots that Peter and the Lord walked back to the boat together. He did not take the storm away. And I just thought it was profound.
We have a lot more in common than I would have ever imagined before I started this journey with you. So
that's fascinating. Well, let's talk again, and thank you. I will thank Justin as well, but thank you and Noah so much for reaching out. And I didn't mean to be harsh on filmmakers that are believers, but it's been amazing to see how The Chosen has caught on, and it is because it's well done. It is because it's well shot. It is because it's well directed and acted. And here we are now able to be privileged enough to be in a position to have folks like you and other interviewers and other media we've done that are behind the project, not just because they enjoy it, but because critically it fulfills a certain level that people find believable. And if that makes Jesus more relatable, I mean, we literally, brother, heard from, and I got to go, so I'll end with this. There was a family in China that wrote to the series during the pandemic, and they said, we don't know what to do because we're dealing with COVID. We're locked down. We'd never heard the words Jesus Christ before. Right now, our kids have not only sat down to watch the show with anticipation, they can't wait for the next episode. We're all believers. We're all Christians because of this series.
Wow.
So there you go. Yeah.
Well, Stelio, thank you for taking the time out of your obviously very busy schedule to talk to us. Thank you for your great work. And thank you guys, the viewers, for watching and supporting The Chosen and Against the Tide Media. And we're out.
Throw me like a stone in the water, watch the mud rise up. Dress me like a lamb for the slaughter, pour me in your cup. Should've known we'd bring trouble, trouble gonna find you here. Trouble.
Hey everyone, it's Noah Bennett, founder of Against the Tide Media. Got a quick favor to ask that is as fast as the click of a button. If you're a fan of The Chosen and ATTM special content on this channel, you can easily show your support by liking this video, clicking subscribe, and the notification bell. It's a quick and free way of helping us and The Chosen to gain momentum. And you'll be one of the first to know when new videos are released. This will help us continue to grow and spread our message to the world through interviews and other special features such as Zoom rooms, chatting with The Chosen, 53 Questions with Raina, and talking back with Tara and Barb. Actually, only 12% of our viewers are subscribed to our YouTube channel. Only 12%, meaning that almost 90% are not. Please join us by becoming a subscriber, as Season 2 of The Chosen will be released sometime this spring. I believe The Chosen to be the most incredible faith-based series about the life of Jesus in cinematic history, and I'd love for you to join us in helping The Chosen, along with other Christian entertainment, to reach as many people as possible, and it really helps so much. Thank you so much for all of your incredible support, and remember, like, subscribe, notification bell. Thank you again.
Okay.
And then keep in mind that if you go off topic or say something you regret later, Noah can always edit that out. So
Thank you, Noah.
I'm gonna do my intro now, and then I will hang on here. Let me get my screen situated. And I always count myself in like a musician.
Okay.
Hey, I'm Timothy Ratajczak. The people of Israel certainly saw this symbol as a bit bizarre, what exactly appealed to you about playing Moses, especially after Charlton Heston and Christian Bale had a crack at it?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of what you said because there was a phone ringing. Could I ask you to repeat it? Sorry about that.
Noah, you'll edit that out. We'll start all over again. Let's talk specifically about your appearance in The Chosen in the episode Invitations.
So it's hard to speak any more figuratively or literally than that.
The Bible does tell us about the two thieves that were Stelio. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and I just wanted to say that I read somewhere, correct me if I'm wrong, back in the 1990s, was it GQ magazine that named you one of the hottest men in Hollywood? And
it was GQ South Africa. There were a whole lot of
I got to be honest with you. I couldn't be named one of the 40 hottest men, even if I set myself on fire. So good on you. Stelio, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And God bless you. We look forward to seeing you in future episodes of The Chosen. If it, inshallah, if it be the will of God.
Amen. God bless you. Thank you, brother.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Whenever Moses is portrayed, it's usually leading the people into the Holy Land, out of Herod and the Egyptians' occupation.
What did he say?